A man walks into the Senate. He knows they're going to kill him. His friends told him, his wife dreamed about it, a fortune teller warned him on the street. He went anyway. That man was Julius Caesar. And what happened next didn't just end one life. It accidentally ended an entire civilization's way of governing itself and created the template for almost every powerful government that came after. But here's the thing most people get wrong about Rome. Caesar wasn't the beginning of the end. He was barely the middle. Rome had already been dying and reviving for centuries before that morning in March, and it would survive for centuries more after his blood hit the Senate floor. Rome is not a story about glory. It's a story about a city that kept refusing to die. Until one day, very quietly, it did. Let's go back, way back, to a city that shouldn't have existed at all. Around 753 BC, on the banks of the Tiber River in central Italy, a small cluster of villages began to merge. Nothing special. The land was swampy, the location was awkward. Dozens of other Italian settlements had better geography, better resources, better starts. Rome had one thing: people who were extraordinarily difficult to reason with. The early Romans were not philosophers. They were farmers and fighters who organized themselves around a simple principle. If you threaten us, we absorb you. And if we can't absorb you, we destroy you. And if we can't destroy you yet, we wait. Early Rome was a kingdom. 7 kings, according to tradition, though Roman historians later admitted they may have invented a few of them for narrative convenience. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, was such a spectacularly brutal ruler that in 509 BC, the Roman aristocracy threw him out and made a decision that would echo for 500 years. No more kings. Ever. They created the Republic, 2 elected consuls, a senate, a system of laws. It was messy, contentious, and deeply unfair to most people living in it. It was also, for its time, staggeringly sophisticated.
For the next 4 centuries, Rome did something that looked, from the outside, like chaos, but was actually working. They fought. Constantly. The Etruscans to the north, the Samnites to the south, the Gauls, who sacked the city around 390 BC and left Romans with a trauma they never fully recovered from. And then, the big one, Carthage. 3 wars. Over 100 years. The second one nearly ended Rome entirely when a Carthaginian general named Hannibal crossed the Alps with war elephants, which, yes, actually happened, marched into Italy and defeated Roman army after Roman army. He killed somewhere between 50 and 70,000 Romans in a single afternoon at a place called Cannae. That's more than some countries lose in entire wars. Rome lost that battle. Rome lost the next battle. Rome kept recruiting, kept fighting, kept losing, and eventually ground Carthage down through sheer, almost irrational refusal to accept the outcome. By 146 BC, Carthage was gone, literally burned to the ground. Around the same time, Greece fell too. Rome now controlled the Mediterranean. And that's when things got complicated. Here's what the history books tend to skip over. Winning that much territory broke Rome from the inside. All that conquest meant slaves, millions of them. Slaves poured into Italy and drove down the cost of labor so completely that the Roman farmers who had fought those wars came home to find they couldn't compete. Their small farms collapsed. They drifted to the cities, broke, angry, and politically inconvenient. The wealthy absorbed their land. The gap between rich and poor in Rome became almost incomprehensible. A tribune named Tiberius Gracchus tried to address this in 133 BC. He proposed modest land reforms, nothing radical. The Senate had him beaten to death with a chair leg in the street. His brother Gaius tried a decade later, same result. What the Senate had just demonstrated, without quite realizing it, was that the Republic only functioned when everyone agreed to play by its rules. The moment one side decided the rules were optional, it was over. The Republic just didn't know it yet. Enter a series of military strongmen. Marius,
Sulla, Pompey, and then Caesar. Gaius Julius Caesar was not the greatest Roman general. Scipio Africanus probably holds that title. He was not the most brilliant Roman thinker. Cicero would argue that point aggressively.
What Caesar was the most effective communicator of power Rome had ever produced. He understood that perception and reality, managed correctly, are the same thing. He spent a decade conquering Gaul, modern France, in campaigns of breathtaking brutality that he personally wrote up and distributed as propaganda back in Rome. He was his own press secretary, his own spin doctor, a man who understood that you needed the crowd before you could move the Senate. When the Senate ordered him to disband his army in 49 BC, he crossed the Rubicon River into Italy, an act that was technically treason, and said famously, "The die is cast." He won the Civil War. He became dictator. He started reforming the calendar, redistributing land, expanding citizenship. He was doing with power what the Gracchi brothers had tried to do through politics, and getting away with it. And then, the Senate killed him. 23 stab wounds. A group of men who called themselves liberators. Here is the irony that should make you pause. Killing Caesar to save the Republic triggered the permanent end of the Republic. His death plunged Rome into another 17 years of civil war. Out of it emerged his adopted son, Octavian, who was smarter, colder, and more patient than Caesar had ever been. Octavian renamed himself Augustus and proceeded to dismantle the Republic so carefully that most Romans didn't notice it was happening. He kept all the titles, kept the Senate, kept the elections. He just made sure every real decision went through him. He called himself first citizen, not king, never king. The Romans had a deep psychological allergy to that word. Augustus understood this and walked around it. It was a masterpiece of managed fiction, and it lasted. The empire he built stretched from Scotland to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara. At its height, under Trajan, around 117 AD, it contained somewhere between 50 and 90 million people, roughly a quarter of all humans on Earth at the time. The roads they built still exist. The legal frameworks they codified are still woven into the laws of France, Spain, Portugal, and Latin America. The language they spread, Latin, became the mother tongue of half the languages in Europe. Some of the emperors were extraordinary. Augustus, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, who wrote philosophy in his spare time while running the largest empire on Earth. Some were, how to say this carefully, not extraordinary. Caligula appointed his horse to the Senate, allegedly. Nero played music while Rome burned, allegedly. Commodus fought as a gladiator and had people executed for laughing at him, less allegedly. And slowly, across centuries, the edges began to fray. Rome didn't fall the way most people imagine. There was no single catastrophic moment where someone turned off the lights. It was a long, grinding, deeply unglamorous process. The military was overstretched. The economy was strained. Successive emperors debased the currency, essentially printing money, which caused inflation that hollowed out the middle class. Political instability accelerated. In the 3rd century AD alone, Rome went through over 20 emperors in 50 years. Most were assassinated. The empire split.
Constantine moved the capital east to Constantinople in 330 AD, a city that would survive as the Eastern Roman Empire for another 1,000 years, which most Western history courses barely mention in passing. The western half struggled on, and on September 4th, 476 AD, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, a 16-year-old boy, almost insultingly, named Romulus Augustulus, Little Augustus, named after both the founder of the city and the founder of the empire, presiding over its end. Most people in the empire didn't know that was the moment. There was no announcement. Life continued in a different shape. The Senate kept meeting for decades. The Church carried Latin forward. The Eastern Empire kept calling itself Rome for nearly another millennium. Here is what Rome actually was when you strip away the marble and the mythology. It was an experiment in what happens when a civilization becomes so successful that it can no longer afford to maintain the values that made it successful in the first place. The Republic demanded civic virtue, shared sacrifice, and political restraint from its elite. The moment those three things became inconvenient, the elite discarded them. And everything that followed, the emperors, the instability, the eventual collapse, was just the long tail of that original decision. The interesting question isn't why Rome fell. Empires fall. That's what they do. The interesting question is why we keep telling ourselves Rome's story, as if it's a story about power and triumph, when the most honest reading of it is a story about what a society loses when the people running it decide that the rules no longer apply to them. Rome built roads that outlasted its gods, laws that outlasted its language, and a reputation that outlasted its borders. But it couldn't outlast itself. Every civilization that came after Rome studied it, borrowed from it, and quietly promised themselves the same thing wouldn't happen to them. Most of them haven't been proven right yet.